Welcome, welcome. This is Rabbi Moshe Terom, Ways of Israel. And I posted up on this site of Ways of Israel a question that I will be dealing with a passage in the Christian Bible. And of course, this video is not made nor intended to reach out to Jews, but rather to reach out to those Jews that perhaps are involved in Messianic congregations or Christians in particular. So that's why I made the invite to many Christians for this particular video. This video is dealing with a topic that I thought was kind of interesting. A passage in the Christian Bible, in the book of John or Gospel of John, chapter 6, and a very fascinating verse which I came to light onto it just a couple of days ago because someone had made a reference to it. Because I made the mention that, in fact, Jesus was never anointed as the Messiah or crowned as king to be Messiah. Yet there's a question whether his descendants were, in fact, a Davidic descendant. And according to some of the traditions, in fact, that he was a descendant of King David, both patrilineally as well as matrilineally. I'm not going to go into the articles or the documentation onto that, but you have some examples, as in the Peshitta of Mattai, some of the ancient documents in Hebrew and Aramaic that makes mention that Jesus' father, literal father, was Joseph. And even though his descendants may have been of Jeconiah, that by no ways negate his right to be a descendant of David and a potential Mashiach of his time, which is the way I hold. I hold that Jesus was a potential Mashiach of his time. And obviously, all indication is that he's a historical figure. He's not a made-up mythical one by Rome. So obviously, my position is a little bit contrary to Atwell's theory, which is just that, theory. And I made mention of that on my videos on my YouTube channel. But rather, he falls in line to those who was considered a descendant of David, had rightful rights to the throne, but was denied such right to the throne by the Sadducees, who basically usurped the throne of David and would not allow anyone from the house of David to sit on the throne or even make gestures to take over the throne, because the Sadducees were in control, as we know, of the throne and would not let go. And it was that same political power that made the Roman peace that we later read about was broken 3.5 years into the agreement, into the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace treaty that was made according to Daniel, chapter 9, verse 26 and 27. So I want to go take a look at this passage, which I think is very interesting, especially since so many Christians will call Jesus Christ, which means anointed, or Mashiach. And there's so much talk about Mashiach here, Mashiach there. And it's not the first time that the world has been exposed to the concept of Mashiach, like I mentioned to a Chabad rabbi just a few minutes ago, that he posted on my Ways of Israel channel, the importance of letting the world know about Mashiach. The world already known about Mashiach, many Mashiachs, and many times over and over again. So the world is not ignorant of the fact of the concept of Christ or Mashiach, but just rather has been brought to light again into the Jewish world by the Hasidic movement. Saying this, let me go right into the point. Why did Jesus run away from being placed as Mashiach, as king? It could have happened. It would have happened. It should have happened, but it didn't happen. And I want you to take a look. Those of you Christians who have your King James Bible, pulled out my copy here. I want to share with you because obviously it says the same thing in the New International Version. It says the same in the Revised Version. So any versions you take a look at it, it basically says the same thing. It says, when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into the mountain himself alone. That's some powerful words, especially after John says that in the first chapter of John says very clearly that he came unto his own, but his own received him not. That's in chapter 1, verse 11. It says it very clearly. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. And later we got the Gnostic concept that as many that did receive him gave he power to become the sons of God, B'nai Elohim. Now, what is this whole idea that I'm bringing about, especially during my lunch break? The question is, in fact, did Jesus really want to become king? Was there any doubt that he was to become king? And why is it that the Gospels never indicated that he was either anointed to be king or was in fact brought together by the big crowds that followed him to be king? Keep in mind, the context of chapter 6 deals about feeding more than 5,000 people miraculously. As a matter of fact, if you read the verse that leads into that, it says, therefore they gathered. Who gathered? Well, it tells the crowd had gathered because they took the loaves, and when they had given thanks, he distributed to his followers, his talmidim, and his talmidim to them that were set down, and likewise of fishes as much as they could. And when they were filled, he said unto them, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. We can't lose food here. Waste does not go to waste. It's got to be utilized. And therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with fragments of 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. And then those men, which men? Those men that were probably fed, and those men included the disciples, when they had seen the miracles that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that a prophet that should come into the world. In other words, this guy's got to be someone special. He's got to be a Navi. He's got to be the leader of the generation, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation. My friends, because he did miracles, because he fed, he basically met the needs of the people. He produced miracles and wonders. He did things that people said would open their eyes and say, huh? This has got to be Mashiach. Interesting enough, there's a whole video on Netflix about the Islamic Mashiach. Very similar approaches. So the world is full of the concept of Mashiach. The world does know this idea of the Christ, the Messiah, the one sent by God. The question is not who is he or what is he, it's who is he? Did he come already? Well, you've got 2, 3, maybe 4 movements that says, yeah, he's came, he's found so-and-so. But interesting enough, we see here that Jesus perceived. This is an expression of perceiving that he had read their minds, that they wanted to make him king. Now, interesting enough, a couple of chapters further down the line, in chapter 10 of John, which happens to be the holiday of rededication of the temple, as we know it as Hanukkah, this issue about him being the Messiah, because the Messiah is the anointed one to be king over Israel, was a political issue, no doubt about it. And these people wanted to make him the king of Israel. They wanted to force him. As a matter of fact, the word in Greek here, by force, is literally they wanted to take him and rapture him to make him a king, to put him on the throne, as it were, to basically use the force of imposition upon and against the will of the Sadducees or the Sadducees, who were the ones in control of the power play, as it were. By the way, those of you who don't know, that whole lineage that came out of the Maccabees, of the Sadducees, were basically cursed from Hashem because they never had children to repeat, as it were, the descendants. And this is mentioned profusely in a lot of the Talmudic passages relating to the destruction of the temple. That because they held back, they did not grant a descendant of David to sit again and renew the throne of David, that because of that they were punished. Let me use that word. People are not used to that word, punished. Punish. Punish means the consequences for not doing what was right when they knew it was right. It was the right thing to do, yet they didn't do it because they wanted to keep control of the power. And because of that, we see the whole entire system came under. Temple was destroyed, and we know what happened after that. The abomination that caused desolation took force, and it ran with it. As a result, our current exile for over 2,000 plus years now. Now, the reason why they perceived that this guy Jesus had to been something special because he was doing good to the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, he wasn't very good with the non-Jewish people. As a matter of fact, he called a Gentile woman a dog, just to give you an idea of the positive relationship. Now, of course, the whole world, whose message has been changed by the power of Rome, have accepted this Jewish Jesus into their world, as it were. They even made him into a god, very, very similar to another movement. But nevertheless, we see here that when they came to take him by force, to try to rapture him, to try to sequester him, to try to hold him down and make him the Messiah, talking about Jewish people here, 3,000. It says, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. That is a remarkable statement, insight that many people don't realize. Jesus did not want to be king of Israel. Now, I beg the question to my Christian friends, to my pastoral friends, to my friends in the Messianic movement and the Nazarene movement. Here you are now trying to recrown the one who refused to receive the crown until it was forced upon him by a mocking Roman mob at his crucifixion in order to humiliate Jews, to say, this is your Messiah. This is the type of king we are going to crown, a dead king, a king that we will have power over, and kill him and kill every single descendant of the line of David, which, as we know, the power of Rome, which converted to Christianity, became one of the most ferocious persecutors of the children and descendants of David throughout history. They had to hide. They had to change their identity. They had to become some other name in order to hide from the political religious power that Rome became in Christianity. So we ask ourselves, wait a minute. We go back now to chapter 10 in John, and we read what word? We read that, if you're the Messiah, tell us already. If you're the king, tell us already. And we see some changes, some fluctuation. I have told you already, chapter 10, but you don't believe me. You don't believe the works that I do. Interesting enough, he uses that same word, take. It means to rapture by force, but remove by force, as it were, robbery. And he talks about robbery as a thief comes not but to steal and to kill and destroy. I am come that they may have life, and that they may have life more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. Moshe Rabbeinu was the shepherd of Hashem. He watched over the flock. The other question we have to ask ourselves, Christians, if in fact he was the good shepherd, why didn't he take the kingship? He had it in his hands right there. They wanted to make him king. And then he fills the whole room of those who ask, if you're the Messiah, just tell us already. It would suffice. And in other words, he hinted to them, well, I did, but you're not listening. It's got to be clearly made statement. Keep in mind, to be declared Messiah or king, in either way, which way, during the first century meant an immediate sedition against the power of Rome. Rome had signed an agreement, and they did not allow for anyone to try to be a competition of the power play which Rome was. Rome had set up later on its own king of Jehuda, who was King Agrippa, a righteous convert. That which mentions in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, of the two anointed ones that were cut off, karet, from among us. And it was the high priest, and it was King Agrippa of Yehuda, who had the domain of the tribe of Jehuda, or the area of Jerusalem. And the Jews loved him. He basically ruled righteously, but he happened not to be of the descendant of David. And so why they hate them? And it was asked of him in verse 22, at the Feast of Dedication, it was winter, and Jesus walked into the temple in Solomon's porch. Then he came, the Jews were round about him, and said unto him, How long dost thou make us doubt? If thou be the Messiah, tell us plainly. And Jesus answered them, I told you, but you believe not the works that I do in my Father's name, and they bear witness of me. In other words, saying, you guys are not listening. You have no interest in making me Messiah. You have no interest in making me king. You have no interest in accepting me. Yes, it is necessary. Please listen to this, my Christian friends. It is necessary for all of Israel to accept its king. A king cannot be appointed to the throne of the house of David unless all of its people unanimously agrees to accept his rulership over them. We've learned that in Torah many, many times. This concept of Mashiach, and that Mashiach is imposed upon everybody, but the majority is not in agreement, is something contrary to Torah law. They must accept the king as the king. This is one thing that was unique with King David when he arose into power. The people of Israel accepted him, although he was being persecuted by the prior dynasty of King Saul, who happened to be a Benjamite, not a Yehudite. That is not from the tribe of Benjamin, but Judah. And thus we see this taking place thousands of years afterwards, and repeating in its history the fact that a king refuses to be crowned because the responsibility is immense, especially of the house of David. So I'm going to ask you, my fellow Christians, my fellow, not Americans, but my fellow co-religionist Christians, why do we have this? If in fact he had the opportunity to accept it and be taken directly to the throne room, why this delay? Could it possibly be because somewhere he felt that he was not good enough to be the king of Israel? Perhaps somewhere he knew that perhaps he is not the King Messiah that the Torah talks about, that would restore all things. Let me not end it here, because I think there's a lot of questions Christians need to ask themselves. When the Messiah comes, it's not if, but when the Messiah comes, and it's not Jesus, and it's not your Antichrist, that it's in fact the Christ, how will you react to him? How will you react to the Jewish people when this has been always the hope and dream of the Jewish people? I want to read you something in the book of Acts, just before Jesus took off. And I say took off because he was also removed, not by his own will. And I don't want you to think for one moment that when he left planet Earth, he was in a cloud going up to heaven as if he were a UFO or a Superman flying up in the air. In fact, various scholars in the Christian field of manuscripts indicate that here in the passage of Book of Acts, where it talks about that this same Jesus who came to you, was taken from you, will also return, had nothing to do with the clouds. As a matter of fact, that whole phraseology in the manuscript, even according to Bruce Metzger, a Christian evangelical theologian and scholar, he makes mention that in the majority of the manuscripts of the Book of Acts, the word taken up into the cloud is completely not present. So what do we have here then? What do we have as the main issue here? And here we will ask and beg the question again when the question was asked, is it now the time that you're going to restore Israel? Is this the time now? Is it now the time where now you are going to rule? And they were all gathered together. Let me see if I can find it here. Chapter 1, book of Acts. It says, verse 6, when they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Lord, will thou at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? What are they speaking about? They're talking about the restoration of the Davidic monarchy with the whole control of Israel. Keep in mind, he ran away from those who wanted to make him king. And in the Gospel of Matthew, you read that he came with this glorious entrance into the temple. And he spoke about the disaster that was going to take place about the temple. And he told the leaders there, destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days. And he was not making reference about his body. That was later added in by the Gospel of John, the same Gospel that we're reading in order to change the story, as it were. And Jesus says, yes, destroy this temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. Obviously, after 3 days, he didn't raise it up. But of course, he had to have some type of creative interpretation to what he meant. Just like things happened in the post effect after his death. They are become very creative, these ghostwriters. So what does he say? He says, destroy it and I will build in 3 days. Everybody knew during that first century time that the destruction that caused desolation was at hand. Everybody knew, all the rabbis, anyone who had any knowledge in Torah, rabbinical, and Baraita knew that the destruction of the temple was at hand. A lot of things were going amok, a lot of corruption, a lot of sinat hinam, even between Jesus and the leaders, the Pharisees, and the Pharisees against Jesus. Truly, if you have any type of demonstration of unwarranted hatred or unconditional hatred one with another, just look at what was happening in the first century. Look at the gospel of the gospel stories, and they'll tell you it's full of sinat hinam from Jesus and his followers against the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees against Jesus. So let's be equanimous in regarding this. It was going around all the way till the late 2nd century with the Jews. This is the reason why we were expelled from the land, for sinat hinam, for speaking evil, speaking bad, disrespecting one another. The 24,000 disciples of Rabbi Akiba, completely decimated by the power of Rome. They killed them, they slaughtered them like animals. And yet we see here that Jesus had the opportunity to be king and he ran away. Later he goes to the temple and says, you guys got to make me king. And we know what happened with that. That didn't work out, not only with Jesus, but a whole bunch of other descendants of David that came knocking on the door of the leadership that said, no, we usurp the power of the throne of David. We will do whatever we can to keep it, to the point where the temple was destroyed. This, my friends, in summary, is what happened in the first century. Now, you may not like my interpretation of the event, but clearly it still begs a question. And it begged the question for the followers, the emissaries, the shliach of the Rebbe Jesus. And he asked, is it time to restore the kingdom to Israel at this time? And he said to them, it is not for you to know the time. It's none of your business. And the seasons which the Father has put in his own power. In other words, this is an issue of the future in which only God knows. But you will receive power, dunamais, in Greek. And then when he had spoken these words, verse 8, while they beheld, he was taken. Now, interesting enough, it says he was taken by force. And the expression, a cloud received him out of the sight, is not in the manuscript. You'll see it in your translation, but it's not there. It was added on, like in about the 18th century. So it would read like this, verse 9 of Book of Acts. And when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken out of their sight. That's how it literally reads in the manuscripts. And while they looked steadfastly, he went up, and behold, two men stood up in white apparel, which have also said, Ye men of Galilee, why are you standing up? This same Jesus which was taken from you shall also in like manner come back, return. A lot of the phraseology that you'll find in King James Version there is only in the translation, not in the manuscript. And I recommend you, Christian and pastors, to read it up in the manuscripts of the book of Acts, how it's read in the different versions. Your eyes are going to be shocked. Your faith will be rattled. It should be. Because even Jesus didn't know when it was his time to come up. So Jesus left this plane, to make it simple, planet Earth, the area, the region of Israel, the land of Israel, being taken away against his will to be removed from the area of hostility and immense pressure and persecution that was going to initiate. They wanted to save the potential Mashiach for a future return. He never returned. He never came back, neither in the generations of the disciples, neither in the future generations, neither for over 2,000 years. And he left without being anointed, being declared king, and anything to do with the position of Mashiach. And yet the biggest marketing tool that was used was this notion of calling Jesus the Christ, the Mashiach. How can he be Mashiach and not have a nation to rule, a nation to govern? Oh, it happened in the heavens. No, it didn't. As I just indicated, those passages that were added into the 18th century by Christian translator scribes was not present in the manuscript. So you can't say he's hanging out in the clouds. The apparitions of the clouds, the only reason they added it because they saw some of these Christian scribes, the indication in Sanhedrin that the Messiah was going to come down in a cloud of heaven. So the cloud refers to glory and power and strength, not like on an ass cult, which refers to humility, humbleness, being part of this materiality. So now you have a new look. Why did Jesus take off, run into the mountains when they wanted to take him by force to make him king? Think about that. So the people wanted to make him king because he was not king. The people wanted to make him Messiah because he was not the Messiah. Now, the terms are hard. And I'm going to ask you again. If Jesus wasn't crowned, that indicates he wasn't anointed either. There's nowhere in the gospel stories that says Jesus was anointed by a prophet. So thus we have a new problem, my friend. We have a Messiah figure that wasn't anointed. We have a king that was not crowned. And our history continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. When will we realize, if we really want the king of Israel, the Mashiach, it's very simple. It only takes all of Israel to agree and say, we want him now. That's it. We want him now. We don't want no more corruption in politics and Israeli play of who's going to be the new president. No. All it takes is for the majority of Israel, 99%, I would say 100% of Israel, to come to the agreement and says, we need the monarchy now. We want to change our political system, and we want the Emet Mashiach now. We'll do whatever it takes to be able to qualify him, to make sure he is the guy, and make sure that Hashem is with him. Because if Hashem is with him, then you know what? we're building our house in vain. We're building the dynasty in vain. And everything we do is in vain. So don't push the notion that we never knew about Mashiach, or that Mashiach is a concept not known, and that it takes certain emissaries to go out throughout the world to teach the world about the true Mashiach. Mashiach's coming. No, we don't need to do that. The world already knows that. Even the non-Jewish world knows about this concept of the Christ, which is exactly what the Rambam spoke about. Lo and behold, the one that could have, would have, should have, didn't want it. Both of them didn't want it. Now we have negation of the fact that he ever said he was Mashiach. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting story. Even in the gospel stories, most of you don't even know about. That he even questioned whether he was Mashiach when they say, who do the people say I am? Oh, he turned over to Cephas, Peter. Oh, blessed are you because flesh and blood didn't reveal this, but my Father in heaven revealed this to you. You got the insight. You know who I am. Yeah, but who anointed you, Jesus? Okay, so the spiritual aspect, we know who you are, according to what Peter said, according to what the gospel says. But the bottom line, it takes facts, it takes action, it takes a movement, it takes a group to say, we have anointed you king, you are our king. He ran from that. He ran from telling us when the dynasty, when the monarchy, when the nation of Israel will be restored again. 1948, Israel was restored as a nation. Jesus wasn't there. God was, because it's God's doing. It's God's doing. We have to keep this in mind. It's God is doing who he's going to put as king over Israel and his messianic kingdom. Think about that. Jesus didn't restore the Davidic dynasty. Jesus didn't restore the nation of Israel. The time of restoration didn't take place. Hasn't taken place. So next, that's what I say. Next. Shalom, shalom. Next. Remember, next.